Hello and welcome everyone to the live webinar on climate change organized by AXA as part of its 10th CR Week 2020. Thank you very much for joining us from everywhere in the world. Climate change, why companies must react fast. This is the question we'd like to explore during this webinar. So I'm Annette Burgdorf and I'm very happy to be joined by Véronique Andrieux, Chief Executive Officer, WWF France. She will tell us why business as usual is no longer an option. So I will first interview my guest and then I will take your question. You can send through from now on and we will aim to answer as many as possible at the end of this interview. Also, if you need to drop off for any reasons, we will be circulating a recording of the entire webinar in the coming days for you to rejoin. So now let me welcome Véronique Andrieux, Chief Executive Officer, WWF France. Hello, Véronique.
Hello.
Thank you very much for coming. So I would like to present you in a few words. You're an international development specialist. You worked with different NGOs such as Oxfam as a regional director and with Action contre la faim as executive director. You were also senior policy advisor at the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a senior advisor at the Club de Madrid, which is a very important forum of former democratic presidents and prime ministers who support democracy. And since August 2019, you're CEO of France of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, which is one of the main international environmental organizations, or the main, I think, whose mission is to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment and to build a future in which humans live in harmony with nature. So I just would like to mention as well that you have a partnership with the AXA Group. And by the way, you are a beneficiary of the activities organized by the entity AXA Partners during this CR week. So let's go straight to the point. Worst wildfires in 18 years have raged across California since August. Komodo dragon, which is one of the largest species of lizard, could be driven by extinction to extinction by global warming and rising sea level. Melting Antarctic ice will raise level by 2.5 meters. Even if Paris climate goals are met, studies find, and the world is preparing for a second wave of COVID-19. I think the list can be much longer. I think that our planet is burning and we do business as usual.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much to AXA for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Yes, I mean, the planet is burning, as you rightly said. Fires, I mean, we've seen this year and last year mega fires as never before. These fires are driven by deforestation, linked to our food system and the intensive agricultural model, but also to climate change. So Australia, for instance, 3 billion animals are dead, worst catastrophe. California fires now. I mean, it's really impacting heavily. It's not about future generations. It's about present. It's about today. And so there's a level of suffering that is really, I mean, we're paying a toll, a very high toll. So I would like to say, first of all, science is unanimous about climate change, about global warming. So we must reduce and cut greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We must become to become carbon neutral and get to net zero. So this is a must. And so the problem is that Paris Accord is not necessarily being is not met today. For instance, our current trends would put us on a trajectory of between 4 and 5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, while Paris Accord, as you said, is about well below 2 degrees and, if possible, 1.5 degrees scenario. So we're really, nowhere near those targets, and so there is 1 decade ahead, and it's very important because now next year we're going to see the COP26 and the COP15 on biodiversity and COP26 on climate change, and it's really very important that we raise the level of ambition to meet Paris Agreement goals.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit more about the current trends? Yeah, what are the consequences, concrete consequences of human activity?
Indeed, it's when we say climate, it means, climate change, it means temperatures rising, it means sea level rising, of course. It means as well that our food security is at stake because the crops are less. It means unsustainable fishing practices, that means less fish. It's also about water scarcity. It's about health, because as we're experiencing today, COVID-19 and previous zoonoses are also a product of nature destruction. So this nature degradation is linked to pandemics, and so it's about health. That's why we say that nature is our life insurance, and it's very important that we protect it, not for the sake only of ecosystems and species, but for one of those species, which is humankind. And so to really understand that we are part of nature, and that saving nature is saving us. I would say that, for instance, coming back to science, IPBES, which is the equivalent for biodiversity of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, they stated very clearly that 80% of the Sustainable Development Goals are at stake if we continue destroying nature. So it's really important that we understand that we must do this for our own health, our rights, and the SDGs.
But do you think that I exaggerate if I say the situation is really dramatic? And how is it possible to remain optimistic? Do you think we have solutions? What are the solutions?
Well, WWF just released its Living Planet report with really bleak figures and numbers. The data are not good. It's a scientific analysis about the population size of mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, and amphibians, and it's a 78% decline of the living world. This is really alarming, a very alarming sign. But there is reason for optimism, because the solutions exist, and science is very clear that we are still on time. It is our choice to really halt and reverse this trend. So it is doable. It is up to us to really to do it. And the solutions are there, they're known, and there is a consensus around those solutions. For instance, we must stop deforestation. We must change and transform the food production model and transition to a sustainable food production. We must go towards a circular economy. We must cut harmful subsidies for nature and climate. And of course, we must align our trajectories to the Paris Accord.
And you recently published a report about biodiversity. Could you just tell us a bit about the key learnings of this report?
Yes, so it's the Living Planet report by WWF. So it measures the population sizes of mammals, fish, reptiles, and birds back from 1970 until 2016. And so there's 68% of nature loss. So that's one key finding. Of course, it covers a range of regions and ecosystems. Some regions are most affected, such as Latin America and Caribbean. Some natural habitats are more affected, such as, for instance, wetlands, rivers, lakes. So these are really at risk. And there's also solutions that are proposed. So, for instance, transition our food system is one. How we produce and how we and our way of consumption, our ways of consumption, food consumption. And of course, conservation that must go further. We need to really invest and enhance conservation based on local communities.
And you mentioned that there are solutions and that politics are getting engaged, but I would like to focus on the role of companies. What do you think is their role to contribute to in this fight against climate change?
So we must understand that this is a whole of society issue. It won't be sorted out by one state or one actor. It's whole of society. All of us must play a role, including, of course, industries and private companies, public companies, all of us. And of course, heads of state, citizens, cities. So
do you think this is the way to not work anymore in silos, so that it means everybody has to work together? This is key to success.
Oh yes, I think it's at the roots of let's say a social contract, a glue that binds us together, because that's the common goal, the common purpose that humanity must have, and it really underpins the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. So that's really the way to go, in my opinion. And so companies have, of course, they are responsible for part of the problem that we're tackling, but they're also part of the solution. And companies can, of course, act on their core business to transform it really profoundly, go to, for instance, to a circular economy, cut emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, zero deforestation. Those are really concrete transformations of their core business and decisions that the top management must and can take. And then they can also, of course, act across the value chain, touching on their suppliers, but also their employees and consumers. That's very important, because the role of their influence and their outreach can be very important. So in particular, champions and leaders per industry, I think there is an expectation from society that they step up and play a leading role to really improve and take the industry further.
And when we focus on AXA, so AXA has launched recently a 3-year partnership with you, WW France, to accelerate the integration of biodiversity to its activities. How do you see this partnership?
Well, it's very important for us. We at WWF work across a wide array of sectors, like, I don't know, food sector, beverages, automotive, construction, and others. But finance is very important. So for us, finance matters very much, because it can shift the trillions in a virtuous way. That's why we have this partnership with AXA. We started, for instance, last year a very interesting research and then a report that we presented during the G7 together, and I think that was powerful. And we did some recommendations around how to assess, analyze, and understand better nature-related risks. How those risks matter for the decisions that banks, insurers, and investors take every day. So it means that rather than having only a climate lenses, we complement climate lenses with nature lenses, because sometimes nature risks are forgotten, or because they will come later, they're more difficult to understand. And today we see that the material risk coming from nature is very important.
And so could you mention any projects you work on with AXA, concretely, any concrete figures?
Yes, indeed. Well, so last year there was this Into the Wild report that was launched at the G7 and was greatly influential. And so we made this one big recommendation that was to set what we call a TNFD. That means a task force on nature-related financial disclosure. This is the equivalent for nature of the TCFD, that already exists. And so this is very important because, as I was saying before, there is an international series of very important events coming up. The COP26, COP15, those are UN conventions that will set the objectives by 2030. Objectives on biodiversity and objectives on climate. So it's very important that the TNFD is launched, and the idea is to launch it either at the IUCN World Congress in January or later this year, or at the COP15 on the biodiversity convention. So this is one example. Another example is that AXA has joined an initiative that was also funded by WWF, which is the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. That was 1 year ago. And so that's very important because that's financial institutions that commit to transition their portfolios and to align them with 1.5 scenario of the Paris Agreement. So this is really good because this means to cut down greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. So this is really important commitments, and so we are accompanying AXA to really raise the level of ambition, to jointly find ways to translate those commitments into practice.
Okay, and do you think that AXA can play a role can be a role model in this insurance and investment sector?
Well, hopefully so. We are, I mean, the idea is, as I said, that per industry, per sector, that there are like champions really, you know, taking the lead and demonstrating on practice in the real world that it is doable, and showing how to go about it. So, but it's a recent partnership. So it's you know, now it's we have the commitments, we have all, and it's time to deliver and to translate those commitments into action. So now it's very important that that AXA top management and the teams are really motivated and completely devoted to the implementation and an actual delivery of those commitments.
That brings me to another question. You mentioned the teams. What is the importance of the teams of people at AXA or everywhere in other companies?
Well, it's a treasury. I mean, it's so important because it's this human intelligence, this collective intelligence, to first grasp of course the gravity of the situation, but as well the solutions, and to really be a force for innovation, proposition internally, and to really spearhead change internally. So those internal champions and this approach is also in terms of how to work together, ways of working collectively, I think can bring about change. And it's very important that, of course, the top management leads the way, but that it trickles down to the whole of the team, and that it becomes something that is embedded and ingrained in the team's, let's say, DNA. And also it gives them pride, I think, and sense of purpose of why they get up every morning, why they come to work, and to work for a company that is doing the right thing and that is working not only for profit, but that is really working for society and for humankind, I think, and for the planet. I think this is really very, very important.
And how do you see these partnerships with companies? Is there something you would like to strengthen, or how do you see the future?
Well, it's on the one hand, it's risky because everyone talks about climate today. So for us, the first thing is to ensure that it's not only about climate, but it's also about nature and biodiversity. So it's very important that we understand that nature is maybe less. I mean, it's less, not as well understood as climate, but it's very important that we really grasp the complexity of what fresh waters, oceans, forests, what it means for the human being. So it's very important that companies get that, because the idea is that insurers or investors like AXA understand that it's absolutely crucial to divest from harmful investments and activities and to redirect those financial flows into virtuous and nature-positive investments. So this must gear every single decision, I hope, at AXA teams.
And we will tackle this topic exactly a bit later on in another webinar. So I really understand that companies have a crucial role to play in the transformation of our models towards a sustainable model economy. But do you think if the economic crisis worsens, with the COVID-19, seeing social revolts emerging, like we do this today, do you think that companies can disengage from their commitments, withdraw their green sustainable commitments?
That's indeed a risk. It's a risk that would be a shame because it would be a really short-sighted approach. I mean, the real crisis we're sitting on, and that's really there, is the climate and the nature crisis. So this ecological crisis as a whole needs to be tackled in priority. So now COVID-19 represents an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really, it's a watershed moment, a turning point that we need to seize to transform profoundly the ways we produce, the consumption patterns, the ways we distribute things, transports, buildings, and move into a sustainable, resilient economy. And that means net zero greenhouse gas emissions. That means understanding the ecological ceilings, the planetary boundaries, and really working within those boundaries and this ecological ceiling. And that is really important, that there is across the board a comprehension and understanding of that this is the real crisis that we need to tackle. And the solutions are there. They create jobs. Renewable energies create more jobs than coal and fossil fuels. We need to seize this opportunity to really put the global economy on the right direction, because the trends today, as we saw, are not going in the right direction. So now there is massive recovery plans with large amounts of money. The idea is that the companies and the different economic actors that get those subsidies, that they really use them in a nature-positive way and in a way that is aligned with the Paris Accord. And so there is a risk, but I see it as an opportunity. I hope that CEOs see it as an opportunity because it's an opportunity for innovation, an opportunity for developing a comparative advantage, an opportunity to create jobs, and an opportunity to create the next economy, an economy that is fit for the future.
Thank you. I've got a question. Transition also means efforts for population, companies, employees. How to find the right path between the Amish and business as usual?
Excuse me, how do you find the right?
How do you find the right path between the Amish and business as usual?
Indeed, business as usual is we saw it. It's just no longer an option. It's just a fake question to pose the problem as if we could still choose to keep on doing what we have been doing for the past 50 years. It just no longer works. Science is unanimous, both on climate and on biodiversity. We need to find alternatives. So the alternative solutions exist, and it doesn't mean to just, stop the economy. What we saw during this crisis is that the economy stopped, but not because there was a good, let's say, a planned intervention, a planned multi-year approach. It was just, let's say, something that was imposed on us and that caused a lot of human suffering. So this is not how we want to see things evolving. We need a robust trajectory to cut down greenhouse gas emissions and a complete transformation of the core businesses and the economic models.
Okay, so just in a few words, I'll let you conclude. So the question we asked at the beginning, why business is no longer an option anymore. So Can you answer this? Sure.
For me, it would be an invitation to AXA and to its teams to really embrace this goal and this ambition, and to really walk the talk and translate those commitments into practice. So it's going to be a very important year until the end of 2021. So let's make sure that we have an ambitious framework in terms of the objectives for nature and climate, and also that AXA's investments and that its portfolio is really aligned with what science tells us. So that would be my conclusion message.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Veronique, for coming and sharing your analysis of the situation and I would say your motivating and positive message. Thank you very much. And it's really great to see that you work hand in hand with AXA to act on the transformation of the sector, insurance asset management sector. It's really great. So this brings us to the end of our session about global warming. Business as usual is no longer an option. Thank you very much for listening, and I invite you to log in 10 minutes, because after this very expert look at the responsibility of companies in the fight against global warming, we'll discover in the next sequence how AXA is adapting to these issues with Antoine De Noisi, CEO of Axa Climate. See you. Bye-bye. Hello everyone and welcome to the live webinar on climate change organized by AXA as part of its 10th CR Week 2020. So thank you for joining us from everywhere in the world. Climate change, why companies must react fast? This is the question we would like to explore during this webinar. I'm Annette Burgdorf and I'm very honored to be joined by Antoine De Noisi, CEO of Axa Climate. He will tell us how to adapt the company as a means to act against climate change. I will first interview my guest and I will take then your question. You can send through from now on and we will aim to answer as many as possible at the end of the interview. Also, if you need to drop off during this webinar, we will be circulating a recording of the entire webinar in the coming days for you to rejoin. So now let's welcome Antoine De Noisi of Axa Climate. Hello, Antoine.
Hello, Annette.
Thank you very much for coming.
Pleasure.
I think it's a bit difficult to present you in a few words because you are a strange animal, as you said yourself. Just a few words. So you are an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, we can say, and author of several books. You joined as Chief Marketing, Digital Data and Customer Officer AXA France Excom, and today you are CEO of Axa Climate. I think we can say that you're a man of strong convictions, an expert of climate change and adaptation. But perhaps first of all, what do you mean by adaptation to climate and environmental crisis?
Thank you, Annette, for your invitation. And I think it's important indeed to clarify the definition. As you know, climate change is far-reaching, global and fast. Okay? That's climate change, as we can say, is already here. But for most corporates, decarbonization is maybe the only step in addressing climate change. That's great, decarbonization, of course, but that's not enough. And our conviction to us, especially at Axa Climate, this idea is that the question is not so much how does my business impact climate, but the key question now for corporates is how does climate impact my business? And Annette, if you see all the components of many businesses, whatever the sector of activities, you see that climate already impacts many activities. It impacts human resources, for example. It's more and more difficult for large corporations to attract young talents without a strong purpose. It impacts operations. When you are a manufacturer, it's important now to factor the increase of cost of water due to water stress, due to drought. It impacts products and marketing teams. It's important now for corporations to rethink their value proposition to fit new customer needs. And especially, and for example, it impacts financial teams. How do I access capital? I keep accessing the capital in this situation of climate change.
So what you say, everything, the entire organization is impacted. So I guess that's not easy to adapt, or how to adapt to this?
It's not easy because it's complex, but it's the key challenge nowadays. And for an organization, they need to understand that adaptation means being in motion in a global way by transforming all the components of the business. And what we call at Axa Climate and at Axa adaptative business means that when you are able as a corporate to build an adaptative business, you are able to transform risk and many risks related to climate into opportunities. And at the end of the day, the key component of success for corporates is not to suffer and to be a kind of victim of climate change, but to transform it into an opportunity to increase profitability and to keep being able to keep growing in terms of business.
Okay, I think this is an interesting concept, what you just mentioned. Everything is in permanent motion, but for a mastodont like AXA, I guess it's not easy to adapt to it. And what I understand as well is that adaptation is not reduced to CO2, as you just said. It means it's really the whole organization. To apply to AXA, what does it mean concretely?
Annette, I think AXA is a perfect example of it because climate impacts all our value chain of insurance. And it's not for random that climate is at the heart of our purpose, of the purpose of AXA itself. So we can say that at AXA we are a bit like climate adapted by design, I would say. But
what does it mean?
I mean that, and I'm going to give you some concrete illustration of that, illustrating some key blocks of our value chain. First, what does it mean for investment? For investment, that means that we have already started to change the mix of investment to be able to better support green business. For insurance, that means that we have already started to adjust our products and to adjust our value proposition of protection. And I'm sure that we are going to talk about parametric insurance later. For assistance, that means that more and more at AXA, we are able to protect our customers in real time, leveraging satellite images and being able, for example, for a flood, to be able from the sky to assess the situation and to better protect our customers. But beyond this, I would say, classic value chain of insurance, I think that what is key and the key recipe of success for AXA in this purpose of climate protection is really to change the daily lives of employees. And you see at AXA, for the moment now, many initiatives that change the way we behave in a day-to-day related to climate. It can go from dematerialization to energy savings for buildings, but more than just, I would say, these classical initiatives, we see more and more citizens' initiatives coming from employees of AXA. I have two examples for you, Annette. The first one is Art in Action, and the second one is AXA for Climate. AXA for Climate is a kind of bottom-up approach coming from employees that wants to change and have impact on the day-to-day.
There are many people who want to change, who want to participate at AXA?
Yes, because
How
a lot
many?
of people, I will not be able to give you the exact figures, but we see more than tens kind of initiatives like that across the globe. So that's a lot. And what is very interesting for us...
So the initiative comes from them, they ask...
Exactly. It's not a top-down initiative. It's not, I have a purpose, I want to decline my purpose across the company. It's not like that. It's really bottom-up. It's really employees of AXA that feel committed related to climate, that start to collaborate, to discuss between them. And the key question for them in this kind of initiatives is, what can we do in our day-to-day as employees of AXA to impact climate and climate protection?
Okay, and let's talk now about AXA Climate. Is this the way, is it how AXA adapt to this? You mentioned the whole value chain of the insurance where you act. Yeah.
Yes. So as you know, I'm not the CEO of AXA. I'm the CEO of AXA Climate. So I would say that I will not recap telling you that AXA Climate is the A to Z of AXA adaptation related to climate, of course. AXA Climate is one tool, but it's one tool among others. It's a key tool for AXA Climate, because we are like an accelerator. We kind of we cut through all the value chain of AXA with a specific focus on climate. And if we try to understand who we are at AXA Climate, we are a business unit. We are 60 team members. Okay. With one focus on climate.
What kind of profile? What is it? Scientists or?
We have 1/3 of underwriters that underwrite the risk on behalf of AXA, when 1/3 of climate experts by peril and climate globally, and we have 1/3 of people coming from tech and innovation background, I would say, yes. And our common passion and obsession is, how do we protect our customers against climate risk? And what is quite interesting is we cut through AXA. So we are doing, our mandate is to revamp our value proposition for investment, for insurance, for assistance, etc., etc. So it's a very global mandate. That's why we need to collaborate with many other team members from AXA, but it's a really exciting purpose.
And now let's talk about concrete actions. Perhaps you can tell us what exactly you're doing.
Yes, maybe it's important to understand what is the value proposition of AXA Climate, in fact. The value proposition of AXA Climate, Annette, is how do we help our customers, big corporates, to accelerate their climate adaptation. And to do it, we are able to accompany our customers along 3 different timings. The first one is real time. The second one is 1 year, and the third one is climate change anticipation, several years. So it's important that you understand that we build, test, and deliver our offers along these 3 main pillars. After, you want some concrete
Yes, of course, exactly. As you said, there's for the real time, perhaps. Let's start with the real time.
I will take maybe to start with the timing of 1 year, which is a perfect timing of insurance. What do we do at AXA Climate? We build what we call parametric insurance. I'm sure you want to know more about parametric insurance, Annette.
What is this all about?
Parametric insurance means a fully automated insurance contract. That means that we trigger, as an insurer, payout immediately after the evolution of weather-related indices. So let's take a concrete example. You take excess of rainfall, you take temperatures, you take variation, wind speed, whatever is related to climate. You set a threshold, and the rule of the game with the customer, the corporate, is quite clear. If the threshold is triggered, you receive the payout after a few hours.
Okay.
So it's fast, transparent, and it's more affordable because we do not send many claim adjusters on the field to check the claim itself. So it's quite a kind of small revolution in terms of product.
The fast reaction is very important.
Yes, exactly. Being fast
appreciated.
For climate events, it's free.
Yes.
So maybe some concrete example of what we are doing to help our customers. First, if you are Annette, the CEO of a large manufacturing in Germany, when there is a drought, the river of the Rhine at Cologne, for example, is getting lower and lower.
Bavaria.
Yes, it's a good point.
Danube.
Is lower and lower, and you cannot transport anymore your goods.
Yeah.
We have a parametric coverage for you that trigger payouts to reduce your business discontinuity based on the level in terms of centimeters at Cologne to be able to protect you. If you are a crop producer of sugarcane, for example, in South America, you have some difficulties to harvest the crop at the end of the season because of excess of precipitation. We can trigger a payout based on the millimeters of precipitation in your area. And the last point, last example, a good one is if you are head of public institution, for example in Morocco, and you want to protect your vulnerable population against earthquake, parametrics is a key element of your success because it's quite easy in the setup to trigger payout for vulnerable population based on, for example, peak ground acceleration. So we have this kind of parametric cover in Morocco. When there is a peak ground acceleration at a certain level of severity, we can trigger a payout for vulnerable population. So parametrics, it's really a small revolution in terms of product that checks all the boxes of customer experience, profitability, and being able to deliver value as soon as possible, as fast as possible for our customers.
And I remember when we prepared this webinar, you told me sometimes we wake up our clients in the middle of the night when there is an urgency. Okay. So can you tell us, is there anything very concrete about that?
Yes, of course.
So it means there's a
let's try to be as concrete as possible.
Yes,
so it's a second illustration. I told you about the 1 year duration and timing of our value. But now I'm going to talk about the real time. Because when you suffer a tropical cyclone, you want to act in real time as a customer. Yeah. You want to be protected in real time because you have employees, you have assets, etc., etc. It's good to get some money from the insurer after, but during the event, you want to be protected. That's why at AXA Climate, we launched a product called Saimo, which is a 24/7 monitoring operations to wake up our customers, especially in the middle of the night, when it's a good decision, the good timing for us, for them, to take decision. So I give you an example. There is suddenly, in the middle of the night, the trajectory of a tropical cyclone shifted. It's our responsibility at AXA Climate to take our phone, to wake up our customers, the safety officer of our customers, for example, and to tell him, okay, the trajectory has shifted. It's time for you to act. And maybe to send a communication to our employees to convince them to stay at home.
Okay.
So real time is a key component of a very good protection for the customers.
Okay. Are you when you meet your clients, are you positively or negatively surprised by the knowledge of your clients of all these climate changes?
Oh, it's a good, very good question. I think that the knowledge, the average knowledge about climate is very low across whatever the sectors of activities. Because in our day-to-day, Annette, and I'm sure you are in this situation, we are reading newspapers, we are reading fake news, we are reading articles from skeptics, articles from activists, and it's very difficult when you are the CEO of a corporate or the top part of the top management of a corporate to strike the right balance and to split between the science and the fake news. So the key priority and the key concern of corporates which we work with is really to understand. And not to understand in average, globally, what is, for example, the global increase of temperatures for Europe, but to be very concrete. I have a plant transformation unit in the south of France. I want to know exactly what will be the impact of increase of temperatures in this area. And that's where we bring some value at Axa Climate, because we kind of bridge the gap between all this concern around climate from the corporates, I want to learn, and scientific ecosystem. Because the one having the answer to this question of what will be the increase of temperature in this specific geography is a scientist. And at Axa Climate, we are more and more able to help our customers to anticipate the impact of climate change.
Okay. I've received many questions. So what are the sectors your clients belong to?
Alors, in order to sorry for my French, but when you are looking at our sectors of activities, the common denominator is suffering. Our customers are suffering from climate. So they are not smiling about climate. So I mean we are targeting critical sectors: energy, construction, finance, and agribusiness. These are the four main sectors of activities highly impacted by climate.
And what are the main concerns? You say they are suffering from climate change. What are the main concerns of the companies you work for?
The main concern is how do I take it in order to be sustainable? Because the main challenge for big organizations is not to take one problem, one solution. So the CEO of these big corporates understand that this change, this need of adaptation is global and complex, systemic. So the question of the top management of corporates is quite simple, is how do I begin with? How do I start this adaptation journey? Yes, I know that I need to decarbonize, but going beyond, what do I do? What is a framework to be able to transform by design all the components of my business?
Okay, I will take another question. Axa Climate is young, but is Parametric Insurance recent in Axa?
Parametric Insurance was launched 5 years ago.
Why that 5 years ago? What has happened?
Maybe it's like innovation, and you cannot anticipate it. But 5 years ago, a few team members of Axa has decided to test this innovation, and they've been able to experiment this innovation. And my mandate now with Axa Climate is to make it at scale.
And yes, I guess that at the beginning this was a small team, and now it's growing up. Can you tell us a bit more about the Climate Change Academy? Is it only reserved to our clients, our managers, ex-coms at AXA also?
No, it's all, of course, for AXA employees also, and we are work on.
What is it for, AXA Academy?
AXA Climate, it's clear. It's to help to get employees onboarded. And to get them onboarded, to put them in motion, they need to understand. So Climate Change Academy, it's a set of programs, masterclass, training sessions, in order for each employee, whatever the department, whatever the level in the hierarchy, to understand the climate change. And more important, because it's not only understand, it's also to make the link, the connection between what is climate change and what is my business. How do I adapt my business from what I take from this session? So we are working on, of course, a first layer of program which is understand to act, but another layer of training programs called act to adapt, to make it as concrete as possible for each employee.
I think it's very important to stay very concrete.
Yes, another concrete example, I want to be too conceptual, sorry Annette, but we are working with a big cooperative, an organization of crop producers, the largest one in France. Yeah. And the question is quite concrete. I'm producing wheat. What will be the yield of wheat in 10, 15 years related to climate change?
And I would like to ask you another question. What are the partnerships you engaged in? Do you work with public actors, for example, Météo France or like this, or how do you work?
Yes, we are very open. Because we are only 60, so it's not possible to do all what we are doing internally. So we are in a very open innovation mindset. That means that as soon as we have better than us outside, we partner. And the way we innovate is first to select the best partners outside AXA, to be able to do, for example, some white labeling, to test and pitch the offer as soon as possible to the market. And only as a second step, if a customer is willing to pay for it, we can have the thinking about what do we want to internalize at Axa Climate or not. So it brings us, this kind of innovation process, brings us speed. And speed is really the recipe of success in the topics that we are discussing today.
Why that speed?
Because we have no clue, in fact, what will be expected from our customers for climate protection in the coming years. We have no clue. We have some intuition. So you have two options, Annette. Either you work on one very precise product in the kitchen of Axa Climate for many months, and you wait for having a feedback after 1 or 2 years. It works, it doesn't work.
Of
Either
course,
you are
but
very open.
speed, when I think of speed, you can make mistakes when you're speed.
Speed doesn't mean precipitation. You can be fast and do some good quality in terms of protection. And parametric is a good example of that. What does it mean, parametric? Parametric means being fast. You pay just after a few hours. Does it mean that we are not paying the good amount of money? Not at all. Because we are doing in the kitchen some good underwriting to be able to deliver the good payout, the fair amount of money to our customers. So I will not be, I'm very keen on the idea of being speed in the innovation. I insist on it. And speed doesn't mean bad quality. Please, Annette.
Here's, I'm an employee at AXA Germany. How can I contribute to AXA Climate?
It's a good, I have many ideas for you because Germany is a key country for us. So please contact me first, and after we will discuss many ideas. I have one idea, I have one dream. Maybe this employee of AXA Germany is working for AXA GI entities targeting SMEs and individuals. My dream is to embed in all AXA property insurance product for household, for example, a layer of fast payout. That means that if you suffer a flood in Germany, whatever the impact for you, because we are able, as AXA, to leverage satellite images and to understand from the sky that you have suffered something, we trigger automatically a first amount of money. It can trigger a great customer experience, being paid without submitting a claim. And after, you can stick to this traditional claim management system, but being as fast as possible when you know that your customer is impacted. For me, it's the priority, and I will be very happy to work with AXA Germany on this journey.
Antoine hat sehr gute Ideen für Sie, glaube ich, in Deutschland.
Yes, I not speak German.
AXA Climate works with very specific technologies like satellites. Do you have partnership with satellites providers? How does it work?
It's very difficult, Annette, to select one constellation of satellites because you have many huge diversity of satellite constellations with pros and cons. Sometimes you have a good resolution, sometimes you have the good timing. So part of the job of my team is when you have an event, for example, in Greece, when Greece suffered an earthquake, a Mediterranean hurricane, and a forest fire over the past weeks, so highly impacted, you select the best satellite images at the right timing. So it can be private one, it can be public ones, but the recipe of success is to know well all the diversity of satellites in order to pick and choose and to task the good one to get the right image to protect your customers.
Sorry, Antoine, time is running. I just would like to finish with a bit more personal question.
I do not take any personal question, Annette.
As I know you have an entrepreneurial spirit, how is it possible to remain entrepreneur? Because I think this is really something, this is an asset for your customers.
It's a key question. It's my day-to-day concern and challenge. I would say the first answer is to think about the right environment. If you have the right environment, you can take the best of the large companies and the best of the small startup. What do we leverage at AXA? We leverage capacities, we leverage skills, we leverage global footprint. And what we leverage from our entrepreneurial mindset, we leverage speed, we leverage the ability to be as fast as possible to meet the customers directly. And I think the key is to strike the balance between the two worlds. But getting the good environment for it is the key element of success.
Thank you very
You're welcome.
much,
It was a
Antoine, for sharing. Thank you very much for your questions. They were really numerous. I understand that AXA Climate is really a very efficient, a great tool to better protect your clients against climate risks. So this brings us to the end of this session. thank you very much for listening, and I invite you to rejoin us again to reconnect in about 10 minutes. We will focus then on green investments and how AXA's investment strategy does contribute to act against global warming. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Hello everyone and welcome to the live webinar on climate change organized by AXA as part of its 10th CR Week 2020. Thank you for joining us from everywhere on the world. Climate change, why companies must react fast. This is the question we would like to explore during this webinar. I'm Annette Burgdorf and I'm very happy to be joined by two financial experts, Pascal Christori, AXA Group Chief Investment Officer, and Hans Stotter, Global Head of AXA Investment Managers Core. They will give us a unique perspective on the investment strategy of the AXA Group and what it means to be a responsible investor. First of all, I would like to interview them and then I will take your question that you can send through from now on. And we aim to answer as many as possible at the end of the interview. Also, if you need to drop off for any reasons, we will be circulating a recording of the entire webinar in the coming days for you to rejoin. So now let's welcome Pascal Christori and Hans Stotter. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for being with us today. So I would like to introduce quickly, Pascal, you joined the group in 2001. You took over the function of Global Head of Engineering, Structuring and Solutions Development in 2008. You then led AXA IM's global asset allocation teams, and since January 2019, you're Chief Investment Officer of the AXA Group. And Hans, you spent part of your career in the Netherlands at ING Investment Management, as you're Dutch. You were Chief Investment Officer and board member of the ING Investment Management, and you joined AXA IM in 2018, and you have been appointed Global Head of AXA IM Core in April 2020, so recently.
That's correct.
Thank you. So, Pascal, my first question is for you. The 2020 climate report says that AXA wants to make 24 billion euros of green investments by 2023 and should completely get out of coal by 2040. So do you think that investment will be only green and ethical in the future? And tell us more about the Axa's investment strategy and how does it contribute to fight against global warming?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say that the investment strategy of an actor like AXA is not only allocating capital to finance less carbon-intensive companies, but as well to set an example of a best-in-class investment strategy. So beyond this example, we've been, as you say, walking the talk on being very innovative to finance sustainable projects. We've been pioneering the exit of the coal. It was announced in 2015, and we recently announced that we are totally exiting out of it in 2030 for OECD countries and in 2040 for the rest of the world. Beyond the exit of coal, we've been as well illustrating ourselves in exiting a lot of sectors, the most polluting one, such as palm oil. It is oil fraction on palm oil, and we've been as well measuring this so that we avoid the stranded asset. We want to be really forward-looking and to avoid to be trapped into some assets that we believe will lose some value. On our investment strategy, we also announced a 24 billion green investment plan. We believe it's a real ambitious target in 2023. We are currently invested by 13.6 billion end of June earlier this year. 13.6.
Okay.
And this will be composed 50% by green bonds, 25% by renewable infrastructure, and 25% in green real estate.
Just a question, 13 billion euros invested, green assets. What does it mean compared with the global assets under management of AXA, which are about 820 billion euros?
It's closer to 600. So basically the 13.6 is close to 2%.
Okay.
It is currently twice what the United Nations PRI is recommending. It's recommending. The recommendation is to be at least at 1% of your assets in green. And we have increased our ambition to reach 4% of our balance sheet in 2023. It represents as well, to give more color on it, 10% of our yearly investment plan, which is
and
not
compared
neutral
with the industry or with other companies, so is this ambitious?
We believe that we are quite well advanced in that field.
Yeah.
And for example, if you consider the size of the market of the green bonds, it's currently close to 260 billion. And so having already 13.5 billion of green assets is already quite massive if you look at the total size of the green bond market. And we believe as well that when we have delivered our plan in 2023, having, roughly speaking, half of it in green bond, 12 billion, obviously will be quite substantial compared to the size of the market.
Okay, and concretely, how do you measure the performances of companies and of your investments?
Yeah, we have a wide set of KPI, which are going from the standard ESG scores, environmental, societal, and governance, which we've been starting to compute, many years ago. But we've been fine-tuning a little bit our KPI on the, if I were to say, the thermometer of our investments. We are measuring the carbon footprint, the tons of CO2 issued divided by the $1 million of revenues for the companies we invest in. We are also computing what we call the warming potential of the portfolio, which is more forward-looking. So on the CO2 footprint, we are happy to announce that during the last 5 years, because we started computing these figures, it was back in 2015, that we've been decreasing our carbon footprint by 31% during the last 5 years, which is already quite substantial. And today, the carbon footprint of our investments are 30% lower than the benchmark. So this is the universe we invest in, and the real portfolio is 15% lower than the universe. So therefore, a kind of minus 45% of, let's say, lesser CO2 footprint compared to the investment universe.
And do you think that partnerships are really key to success, really key to unlocking a low-carbon future, or how do you work?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, well, you can't remain alone and get isolated. So I would say that the more, the better, and the more powerful you get, and the more impact you have on your investment universe. This is the reason why we've been joining a lot of alliances, being through the CFLI, through the TCFD as well, and we've been really active in TCFD, and you know that we are.
I don't know if everybody really understands.
So that's alliances
so
where really we push the best-in-class practices. Okay. Recently, it was end of last year, we joined what we call the Net Zero Asset Alliance Owner, which gathers something like, I think it's 5,000 billion of assets, i.e. a massive alliance, where we believe that all the asset owners, being insurance company, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, we are all committed to the same direction, which is to be 1.5 degrees aligned in 2050, or as you wish, net zero in 2050.
Okay, what are the strengths of these alliances?
So, the larger asset base you represent, the more impact you can have vis-à-vis the companies you are investing in. We really, I would say, push the concept of SBTI, it's science-based targets, i.e. having companies committing to a 1.5 degrees alignment in 2050, and that it's making ourselves reach what we call a kind of climate-driven asset liability management. Mm-hmm. It's true that if the companies we are invested in are themselves committing to be net zero in 2050, for sure, we'll all together deliver to make our planet great again, for sure.
Thank you very much. Hans, what is your vision as an asset manager of a long-term and responsible approach to investing?
Yeah, there are a few asset managers in the world that have incorporated deeply in their corporate philosophy the notion of ESG and sustainability. But AXA IM is very proud to be one of those. It effectively means that in our daily process as an active manager, where we focus on fundamental research and data-led processes, that we deeply incorporate in that ESG considerations across all our portfolios, whether it's fixed income, equity, multi-asset, or alternative strategies. Now, we are the asset manager of AXA Group, so we partner very closely with Pascal and his team, and AXA has made very clear its commitment and ambition with regard to investing not only for financial return, but also for the collective good. And as a result of that, AXA IM has become already one of the largest managers of responsibly managed assets in the world. Why is it important? In essence, ESG investment is about predicting the future. And ESG, if you incorporate that in your analysis, we believe you have a better insight into that future, both from a risk perspective as well as from a forward-looking total return perspective into those companies. So, simply said, sustainable investing is better investing. It gives you one additional insight into the risk and upside potential of an investment. Now,
just a question, but because you're not a philanthropist, so can you tell us about the economic performances of these investments, of green investments?
Yeah, so of course we need to deliver attractive returns for our clients. That's the starting point. But if you want to deliver attractive returns, you also have to see it in the context of the volatility of those returns. So you always look at two metrics. What is the return and how much risk did I take to get to that return? To see the impact of ESG factors on risk is easy. So you avoid problems of companies that have deep environmental problems or social problems or supply chain problems, which has a negative effect on a company's share price, for example, or of its bond price. So on the risk side, you can see that. On the upside, what I believe is that if you are able to invest in the companies that are transitioning to a more sustainable business model, a more profitable, more sustainable profitability, you unlock additional capital available for that company, which lowers the cost of capital for that company. And if the cost of capital becomes lower, we as owners of that capital benefit. So there is both an upside potential and a risk component to that. We are certainly not philanthropists, but we do want to do something good with the money.
Okay, what are your ambitions?
So our ambition is to be recognized as a world leader in responsible investing, both in thought leadership and in size. And I think we're quite well on our way to do that. The way we look at things is that on the one hand, we want to avoid making investments in the high pollutive sectors and companies. But that's not enough. In addition to that, we seek to invest in companies that have transitioned to a more sustainable business model, or management teams of companies that have committed to make that transition in the near future. If to be part of that transition, I think is a very important part for us as asset manager to contribute to society as a whole. And to make that more concrete, in line with what Pascal just said, we aim to incorporate ESG KPIs, whether it is ESG score or carbon KPIs, for AXA Group, but also for our third-party mutual funds. And in addition to that, have deep conversations about the intentionality with our mandate clients, institutional investors that have mandates invested with us.
Okay, thank you. You just mentioned that you accompany teams, even in polluting industries. How do you see the teams, the role of the teams at AXA to do this, to accelerate this transition?
Well, globally, within the investment team worldwide, the ESG and the sustainability of the investment philosophy and strategy is really shared, and it's completely mainstream in the investment processes. As Hans mentioned, we are computing some scores, some KPI, and it's really, I would say, an entire part of the investment process. We are also favoring innovation. We've been collectively designing a new type of bond, which is the transition bond concept, which really is about financing the energetical transition of some projects, being cleaner transportation, renewable technologies, and so on. So it's beyond the usual investment process, where it's completely mainstream. We are also favoring innovation. We are also lobbying a lot. I would welcome that the taxonomy, which is pushed by the European Union, will become larger and larger. It was formerly concentrated on green assets, green, we say dark green, but it's little by little evolving, and it's advocating, let's say, shades of green concept, and we are welcoming that the green bond concept could be extended to the transition bond that we designed some months ago.
Okay, do you think that every asset manager should be an ESG manager?
Well, yeah, let me first comment on the teams and the people at AXA IM. I think it is extremely important that every portfolio manager, analyst, client-facing staff, our reporting teams, and so on, all of them live ESG. And it should be part of the normal life of an asset manager. If you work for AXA IM, this is part of your life. And for this reason, we have embedded responsible investment activities deeply in the investment processes, and recently even abolished having a responsible investment team. It makes us one of the first asset managers that stop having a responsible investment team, because in our vision, our whole team, everybody at AXA IM is the responsible investment team.
Okay, so do you think that ESG, I insist, do you think that ESG is still considered as a good thing by many companies, or is really integrated in the mindset?
I would say
in your sector, in the investing
so in the investment
sector.
I would say ESG is fully integrated. As Hans mentioned, it's mandatory. That's really what clients, policyholders, shareholders are expecting from us. Therefore, I would say that in the medium to long run, getting aligned with the net zero, for example, for climate, is really of the essence. And we believe that through this prism of ESG, will deliver more stable returns. As I said, the stranded asset for us is quite critical, and we are long-term investors. We need duration in our portfolio, and therefore getting the visibility on the cash flow, on the strength, the robustness of our asset is really a key one.
So you asked, is it a do-gooder thing? Often sustainable investing is seen in conflict with capitalism. Capitalism is built on private ownership of companies, of a free market, and a for-profit business model. And I am strongly in favor of the first two.
Perhaps we will see for the first time resources are limited.
It has its limits, but I think the bigger challenge on those three are not with the private ownership or with the free market. It lies with the for-profit business model, which I think is too narrowly defined as short-term profitability for shareholders rather than sustainable profitability that is delivered in the long term. If you focus on sustainable profitability rather than this quarter's return, you automatically take into account the environment, your employees, the supply chain, everything. Otherwise, you're not building anything that's sustainable. I think that sustainable profitability should be part of our focus as active investors to seek, rather than to simply say what has the best return in the next 3 months.
I guess that your business is really changing in this faster changing world. What do you think, what are you doing differently today compared to what you did 3 years ago?
Well, maybe a first illustration is looking at what European Commission has announced for the Resilience Recovery Fund. 1/3 of it will be issued through green assets, green bonds. So you can see the magnitude of the change. Really, and it's both awareness, but as well as concrete needs to finance the energetical transition. So, for example, within our portfolio, so beyond divesting from, I would say, the less clean categories assets, is really taking the full, the half full glass approach, where we would say, okay, it's really about improving the forward-looking KPI, the way our portfolios are contributing to the energetical transition, and really favoring, as I said, investment into new technologies. So, for example, teams are currently looking at some smart grids project, which is about really investing into renewable infrastructure. We are also investigating the new technologies in real estate green, obviously putting more capex to finance this kind of mutation of the real estate. And so on the fixed income, it's true that all the green asset, the transition I was referring to are really key. So we have a center of expertise within all the investment family, which concentrates all the brainstorming around those investments, and it is widespread and disseminated, all across the globe into the investment teams of AXA.
Would you like to add something about the way you do business today compared with
especially on the topic of sustainability? I think it is a landslide change. Where 3 years ago ESG was something that a few people in the organization were active in, and a few strategies, sustainable strategies we had as to put in your window shop of the window of your shop, and to show that we also have a couple of these. Currently, I mean, within AXA IM Core, my team, 88% of our assets is fully ESG integrated. So it is absolutely the mainstream, and the 12% that is not ESG integrated is deeply in the minority and will have to change as well. So it is fair to say that now every single portfolio manager needs to have an understanding of ESG. It also is a very big change in the conversations that we're having with our clients. So now there are much deeper conversations with our clients about ESG. They're not just as for them a tick-the-box exercise, but also there it's really changing into an intentionality with regard to doing something good as asset owners.
Okay, I would like to ask the same question, but now projecting into the future. What will be your business in, 5 years? I think we can't say in 10 years, but very soon, the next year, in 2 years. How would...
For asset management, I think if you don't incorporate ESG, you're out of business in Europe for sure. So that becomes
But do you
the
think
minimum
the
norm.
future is in Europe, or is the
No, it's
future
global, but
global?
in the end, as asset
when you
manager,
make business with China or I don't know other companies where the level
in asset
is not the
in asset
same?
management, we work for global asset owners, and the asset owners in the end decide. And our asset owners at the moment are mostly in Europe. We have a global footprint. But our clients really want ESG incorporated. It is the minimum, and they will want to will require that across the whole asset management sector. I think the challenge for us will become in terms of how can we transition our strategy range to become much more focused on SDG aligned investments. So focused on the sustainable development goals, where we aim to deliver a specific positive outcome for society. And that will, I think, 3 to 5 years from now, be the new mainstream where everybody will want to go to in ESG investing.
Thank you. I just received a question I would like to ask you. AXA is ahead in terms of the benchmark, which is commendable, but the reality is that to be net zero coal by 2040 is 20 years away and governments are even. Who would like to answer?
No, maybe on the, it's a little bit linked to the KPI approach I mentioned. We try to be as forward-looking as possible, but it's true that the measures are still not completely stable and we are lacking data. So within our credit universe, so I was referring to, only small 20% of the issuers have been committing to science-based targets. The other ones, they are currently thinking to do so, but without strong commitment so far. So it's true that when you have a largely diversified portfolio, a global portfolio, you have, let's say, to get those data to be able to fine-tune it so that we become net zero in 2050. It is currently investigated. For sure, we try to set to ourselves some medium-term targets, which are, I would say, shorter than the 2050. What I can say is that currently our portfolio is supposed, according to our providers, to have a warming potential which is close to 2.8 degrees compared to let's say a benchmark or a universe which is closer to 3.5 or above. So we are, I would say, already quite well positioned. We try, obviously, to improve further and further to reach the 1.5. We are not yet there. We use all the, I would say, potential action, management action, engagement as well vis-à-vis the company we invest in to make and to reach these improvements. After that, it's true that we won't be able to deliver alone. Back to your comment, coalition, but as well partnering with the companies we invest in are key to deliver.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this lively discussion. Thank you for coming, Pascal and Hans. Thank you very much for your questions. So this brings us to the end of this session about green investments and the investment strategy of the AXA Group. I can see that your ambitions are huge to become the world's leading responsible investor. And for sure, as a leader, you can bring environmental considerations into the mainstream, I think, of traditional finance. Thank you very much for listening. I invite you to join us again in about 10 minutes, I think. We'll focus on science and policy interactions. Is this the key to fighting against climate change? Bye-bye. See you soon. Hello everyone and welcome to the live webinar on climate change organized by AXA as part of its 10th CR Week 2020. Thank you for joining us from everywhere in the world. Climate change, why companies must react fast, this is the question we would like to explore during this webinar. I'm Annette Burgdorf and I'm very happy to be joined by Isabelle Bergeron, Head of Communication at the AXA Research Fund, and Olivier Boucher, climatologist, Deputy Director of the Institute Pierre-Simon Laplace and member of the AXA Research Fund Scientific Board. They will tell us about science and policy interactions as the key to fighting climate change. I will first interview my guests and I will take then your question you can send through from now on, and we will aim to answer as many as possible at the end of the discussion. Also, if you need to drop off for any reasons, we will be circulating a recording of the entire webinar in the coming days for you to rejoin. So, hello, welcome Isabelle and Olivier.
Hello.
Hello. Isabelle, so you are head of communication at the AXA Research Fund, which has been created in 2008. Thank you for coming. Dr. Boucher or Olivier, you are a climatologist, a specialist on atmospheric aerosols and how they affect meteorology and climate. You received many awards, such as the Outstanding Young Scientist Award of the European Geoscience Union in 2004 and a Prize for Innovation in Meteorology in 2015, and many others, but the list is too long to just mention everything. You have been heavily involved in the International Panel of Climate Change, IPCC, and you're Deputy Director, Institute Pierre-Simon Laplace, and member of the AXA Research Fund Scientific Board. Long titles.
Too long.
Yeah. So, Olivier, my first question is for you. Science is a lever to act on global warming. This has been mentioned several times already this morning. How can science provide concretely the way forward on the issue of climate change?
Right. So science has been very clear on the risk associated with climate change. Even since the 1970s, of course, now the risk is much more pressing. We know much more, so the knowledge basis is much larger, but the main message has remained the same. We emit a lot of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, which causes global warming. This is well observed, well modeled, well understood. And we know that there is a range of impacts associated with global warming, such as more intense heat waves, heavy rainfall, drought, inundation, sea level rise, etc. The science also can help us to make projections into the future. So we know that the future is not cast in stone. We know there is still a range of options for the future. Probably the best we can achieve is about 2-degree warming as compared to 1850, which is a reference. But in sort of worst case scenario, it can be much larger. We're probably on track for, at the moment, for 3.5 or 4-degree warming in 2100, and it could be worse, of course.
With dramatic consequences.
Of course, yeah, which is why we have to avoid it. And the science also tells us that there is a lot of inertia in this climate system. So we know we need to act now to have a chance to limit global warming in say, from 2050 to 2100, which means that there is some more warming to come, inevitably, and we have to adapt to it. We know how to adapt, so we have that capacity to adapt, so we need to use it and adapt to global warming. But we also need to reduce emissions as much as we can in order to limit the warming in the second half of the century to this, say, 2-degree warming objective. So to come back to your question, what is the way forward? I'm a climatologist, but I also have colleagues who are more economists. So we know what is the way forward in terms of decreasing emissions. We know we need to phase out coal, for instance, which is a pretty inefficient source of energy. It has a lot of very high carbon content. There is some room for gas and oil, but we know it also needs to be ramped down. We know we need to seek energy efficiency everywhere we can. We need to electrify mobility. We need to make building more efficient, and so on and so on. And of course, you want to start from the easiest and then go to the most difficult sectors to decarbonize. But there is a key concept which the science has brought forward in the last few years, which is carbon neutrality. We know that to limit global warming, there is a certain amount of carbon dioxide that we can emit in the atmosphere, and that amount is fixed, which means that basically you have, when it's used up, you have to be carbon neutral, zero emissions, and every sector has to should have that goal.
Just, I want to get back because you said, okay, we know scientists know about climate change since the 70s. So, and today we say, really now we have to act. But I think we say this since 10 years, 20 years. So, and now we say, how can we be just serious about this? Now we have to act. No, we have 10 years before it was the same.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's not too late, okay. It's the same message, it hasn't changed. It's not too late to act, which is the good news. But of course, it's been repeated for a long time. But it's not easy to change. If it were easy, I think society would already have done it. So we know it's difficult, and we have to tackle that difficulty.
Okay, Isabelle. So Olivier just mentioned that the science has been very clear about the issues on global warming and has long been sounding the alarm. So how's AXA, through the AXA Research Fund, engaged on climate issues?
Yes, so Olivier was also mentioning that science was behind a lot of technical innovations that are needed, for example, to mitigate the impact of climate change. But at AXA, we believe science also has a key role to play in infusing the public debate. So AXA leadership has always been strongly convicted that science has a key role to play in tackling the big challenges that the society is facing. As insurers, we manage risks, so it means we have to know them, to anticipate them, to assess their impact, and whenever possible, to try to mitigate or prevent it. And there are scientists that are doing exactly the same thing. So in 2008, we decided to launch the AXA Research Fund, which is a unique philanthropic initiative which aims at supporting innovative, excellent science, but also disseminating this knowledge to make science useful for the most people and to make it infuse decision-making. So those are really the two pillars.
Can you give us some figures about what you have achieved and perhaps some projects?
Yes, absolutely. So in 12 years, almost 12 years, we have committed 250 million euros, which have been supporting 650 projects. And climate and environment represent a third of those projects, the other being on health and socioeconomics. So really a big component of the money we decided to commit to support science. And if you want, I can give you an example of one project, for example, that shows the alignment of the science we support with our purpose, which is to protect what matters, which is actually the people, their assets, and their activity. So, for example, one researcher that we support, Professor Hanna Zinge, holds an AXA chair on climate risk. And he has established that by the end of the century, half of our beaches may have disappeared. So there's urgent action needed here. So right now he's working with the local governments to make the better modeling, the better assessment, to quantify the risk and to make the necessary adaptation measures in order to protect the communities. So you see here, this is something that, of course, is interesting for us as an insurer, but it will benefit all the community.
And what are the main topics you support or you tackle?
Okay, so there are several aspects about the climate change issue. We try to understand the different causalities also and the different forms of impact. And that goes also on the impact on the biodiversity, the impact on our health or the food or the pollution, things like that. it's really a broad array.
And how do you communicate about what you do? I think communication is really key.
Yes, absolutely. Communication is the second pillar of our strategy, and really we spend a lot of effort of this. You were mentioning the IPCC, and we know for a long time they've been very active, very involved in making sure that all the science was available in a way that's accessible and that's actionable for decision making. Well, at a very humble level, we try to do the same thing. We really encourage our researchers to get their science outside of the lab, because that's key for us to make the science useful. So there are many ways in which we do this.
And I think to make science useful, but also to make people adhere to the solutions and to explain it, to better understand this is really important. Olivier, how can we act to make the most of our knowledge?
Right. I mean, the science has been very good at alerting to the problem. It has also gone a long way to bridge with policymaking through UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the IPCC report, which supported, and that led to the Paris Agreement. But we also need to translate the science into solutions. Solutions for everyone, solutions for people. I mean, we've seen government, but increasingly we are working with businesses, with companies. And here again, we can differentiate between adaptation. We will need some level of adaptation into the future, and we do a lot of work with the companies to help them translate climate projections in some useful information for them, make sense of the uncertainties. I mean, there are a lot of certainties, but there are also some uncertainties about the future. So we work with them to translate that into something useful. And then when it comes to mitigation, to emission reduction, then again, there is some advice that we can provide. We work increasingly with some companies on also the offsetting issue, the compensation through carbon sinks in forest and other places where you have to make sure that these carbon sinks stay there for a long time. You don't want the carbon to go back into the atmosphere. We work with aviation as well to understand how we can avoid some of the climate impacts. So clearly, yeah, there is a lot to do for the companies, and we see with AXA they take this very seriously. I mean, this event is one evidence for that, in terms of course, their own emissions, but also the way they can influence their customers or their providers, and also through investment. And then we come back to the issue of financing and the socioeconomics, which is a little bit far away from my own subject, but which is also very important for climate change.
But from your point of view, what are the limits or the barriers to the scientific solution to everything?
Right. You were asking why we've been alerting for 10 years and not much happened, and that's indeed because there are many barriers in the system, whether they're legal, technological, socio-economical, social, or even behavior. I mean, we're just human, so we know we have habits. It's difficult to change these habits, and I think science should work on these barriers, try and understand them, try to see how they can be overcome.
And for example, from science to policy, isn't it, as you said, we give advices, isn't it a bit frustrating to just give advices, not to decide? Because politics takes decision and...
Yes, but that's why I think we have to differentiate the role of the scientist and the role of the policy making. The scientist can be here in an advisory role. We have to present the evidence, present the option. In the end, society and policymakers have to make the decision, because they have to balance a number of things to make the right decision. But of course, it's tricky, it's complicated, it's the world we live in.
Okay, Isabelle, I would like to ask you the same question. How do we act to make this happen?
Okay, so yeah, it's really about communications and engagement, because yes, as I was saying, we need to get that science out of the lab to make it useful. So really, we at the AXA Research Fund, we dedicate a lot of effort to offer to the scientists that we support the opportunity to make the science accessible, which means understandable and visible to a broad audience. So we give them communication opportunities and occasion to exchange with other experts, not only from the scientific community, but from the industry, decision makers, members of the civil society as well, because indeed we are convinced that this is key. And there are many ways we do this. We even start sometimes with media training for young researchers. We leverage all the communication capacities from AXA, from their institutions, from trustable media partners. We organize events, and we really like to get researchers engaging with non-scientists, and they really like it a lot. Also, they always express it's beneficial for them.
And what do you think, what role should play the private sector alongside with the public sector?
Okay, so yes, there's a complementarity between the private and the public sector in terms of funding. For example, oftentimes the private sector can take more risks, at least that's what we do. We are open to support science in new avenues that can create some very innovative approaches. We are giving a lot of independence to the scientists we support, and sometimes public fundings come on top of this. So that's for the funding part. We also encourage a transversal approach, multidisciplinary. So for example, we think that social science are very important to tackle the climate issue. But then, again, this is communication and collaboration, because we really think that with the current stage of the climate crisis, we need both the public and the private sector to work together. We need the academic world and the decision-making to work together, because the best science, if it stays in the lab, it's not as impactful, and the best decision maker will need some science-based facts to take the right decision.
And Olivier, we are observing when watching the news a rage-filled new movement against science, but also against liberalism, against masks, against everything. People are really, or some people are climato-skepticals, against vaccines, everything. How do you see this movement? How do you see? Because we listen a lot now in the news about the COVID-19 crisis. Scientists are always on the news. They give advices. We listen to them. But more and more people are getting, I don't know, critical against this.
That's right. It's concerning, and we do see that happening on a number of subjects. It's not easy to tackle, I would say. Of course, we need to inform. We need to make the science transparent, and scientists have a duty to make the science more transparent, more open access, reproducible, and we take all these steps. But we also need to inform the public, and to do that, we really need some leverage. We need to use teachers, we need to use media, we need to use the private sector, so as to reach a larger number of people. And when you think of it,
should be a big coalition.
Yes, I think the more you go in the same direction, the more effective it is. But at the same time, it's a subtle balance, because there are also uncertainties. Science is progressing through challenges and questions, so we need to achieve that balance between making sure that what's really wrong is mentioned as being wrong, but also not hiding the uncertainties on the science itself.
It's a bit the same question, but it's about the fake news. What role should scientists play in this overwhelming ocean of fake news?
Right, we had a lot of it with climate skeptics. I think they tend to be a bit less vocal now. I think we've sort of won that battle, at least in Europe, I would say, maybe not everywhere in the world. And but it's been very time-consuming. It's taken a lot of effort because, of course, you're sort of facing some lobbies. That's their job, whereas my job as a scientist is to do the science and then on top of that, communicate that science. So it's tricky, but as I said...
So you feel disturbed in your work by
of
this,
course, yes,
to answer
yes,
to fake.
Exactly. But we tend to rely more on teachers, on schools. We try to put some of that into the curriculum, so you get a broader uptake in society.
Okay, would you like, yeah?
I think
exactly.
also,
What is the role of a company fighting against fake news and to communicate on that?
yes, I think we obviously need to give voice to share the science, but also to explain that the scientific method, what the scientific method is about. It takes some time, it takes some iterations. There's not one single voice. There are several hypotheses with risks associated. So I believe that we also need to progressively, and when I say we, it's not just AXA, it's the media, and every time there's an opportunity to talk about science, we need to talk about the way science is made and not just call on science when there's an emergency.
Because science is very often very complex. And I think this is the opening to fake news, because people want perhaps some easy answers to complex things. And size.
That's true, but at the same time, if you come back to companies like AXA or others, their business rely on science, so they cannot rely on fake news. So that's also where the hope is coming from, is that you need some robust science to make robust decisions, and there is a lot of stakeholders in society where science is in their interest.
And science communication can do a lot to make this science understandable and relevant to people.
But it starts already, this communication, very early at school. As you said, we need teachers, education of our children. Just a question about the COVID-19 crisis. What can we learn from this crisis to act on the climate change? What is the link?
It's an interesting analogy, because with COVID-19, you see that the response had to rely on science. And the countries who have ignored science probably have done less well than the other countries. But in the end, it's the policymaker who have to make the decision, because they have to balance health versus education versus economy. And with climate, it's similar. You have to balance the health of the planet with the economy and with other things. And again, we have this role of the scientist versus the role of policy making. The other interesting analogy with COVID-19 is the fact that you have to act ahead of time. You have to act at some point if you want to avoid the hospitals to be flooded with patients in, say, 2 or 3 weeks' time. With climate change, it's the same, but it's a much longer time horizon. You have to act now for avoiding the worst in 50 years from now. So that's maybe where the analogy stops, and what maybe you have to learn on, again, maybe turn to social sciences also to help you try to convey that message.
Okay, I would like, just because time is running out, with one question for both of you. Are there any opportunities in the fight against climate change? Just to finish the debate on that, perhaps a positive note.
Well, I think they are, and they should be, and we need to make sure that they are more, and that we turn the risks into opportunities, because that's the way we can fight climate change. It's by creating some incentive, not just by having a negative message, but really by having some opportunities.
Would you like to add?
That's fine for me. We'll always be here to support those opportunities and to help amplify them.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming and sharing. Our webinar on climate change is over. We have seen, I think, that companies have a crucial role to play in the transformation of our models towards a sustainable economy, to a sustainable model. They have to take up the challenge by improving its practices and reducing its impacts on the environment. But we need what we have heard at the beginning of the first webinar. We need to accelerate on the ecological and social transition. I think we have also seen that AXA Group has already put in place a robust strategy on climate through different examples, partnership with the ONG WWF, the business unit AXA Climate focusing on deep adaptation needs, the AXA Responsible Investment Strategy, and right now the AXA Research Fund supporting science solutions. So I hope you perceived this webinar as a moment of fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for listening. It was a pleasure being with you today. Thank you again. See you soon. Bye-bye.